So this was originally going to be a much different video, but basically I had this idea that I was going to make fun of a televangelist. And I'm not obvious obviously I'm not really a believer in the televangelism or evangelicalism, as you can tell, but I enjoy partaking of watching some of these weirdos, your Kenneth Copelands, your Jim Bakkers, your crazy ass faith healing stuff. You see all these shit happens, guy up on stage, he slaps a guy over the head, cures him of the common cold, takes old Grandma Gretchen over there, and suplexes her across the stage, cures her broken hip, shit like that. It's funny to watch, basically. And one of the people that I found quite some time ago, a number of years ago, that I thought was even more funny to watch was uh, a person named TB Joshua from Nigeria. And this guy, I ended up finding this guy through this other video I found in which he, quote, banished Greek gods that were possessing this one other guy. And I can't find the video now because the channel he ran, which was called Emmanuel TV, which was named after the TV station by the same name that was run by his church, which was called the Synagogue Church of All Nations in Nigeria. And the channel was deleted for reasons I'll get into later, but I used to watch some of the videos on there. You'd see some crazy ass shit go down, like even more so. Like this was tiers beyond the normal televangelism wackiness. Like you'd see some shit like this.
Shut up! The name of Jesus Christ. The name of Jesus Christ. In the name of Jesus Christ.
So that banger right there was called TB Joshua, Prophet TB Joshua. My bad. I didn't mean to forget the title there. Self-given title there. Prophet TB Joshua versus 300-year-old demon. And contrary to what you might think, it's actually not a crossover between him and Pat Robertson. But this kind of whatever that was, banishing demons from people. Somebody would come up from the crowd, they'd start frothing at the mouth, they'd just like go rabid and all that. And he'd do his thing, smack them over the head, give them one of these, microphone in one hand, that's part of it, put on the whole show there, whole thing. That's how I ended up finding it. I never believed this stuff, obviously, but that's kind of what made this shit popular, I guess, was him doing stuff like that, and people did take it seriously. Well, a couple of days ago, yesterday specifically, I had this guy kind of in the back of my head, because I'd stopped watching him for a few years, because I had a life to live, but I just remembered this guy randomly yesterday, and I was like, you know what? It's been a while since I've partaken of the crazy ass whatever the hell that is. I'll take a look back into it. And originally this video here, I was gonna watch some of those and add some of my flavorful commentary to it and all that. However, again, his YouTube channel that all these videos and such were on that I found originally had been deleted. So I decided I was going to look up why it had been deleted. And it ended up leading me down a bit of a rabbit hole that eventually I ended up watching this documentary put out by BBC, which I'll link down below. But essentially, it led me down a rabbit hole in which investigators and subsequently me ended up finding out about all this different stuff that this guy, TB Joshua, had done, and how much of a despicable person he actually was, more so than your usual televangelist. And it pretty quickly got to the point where I didn't feel comfortable making comedy of that whole situation, even at his expense. So I figured I'd just kind of make this talking about that guy, because a lot of people here in the States, I guess, don't seem to know about him. He was more popular in Africa and Europe, but um, and another reason is because I wanted to elaborate on something else I noticed that I'll get into later, but I'll just kind of give a quick TLDR, I guess, on this guy and the stuff he was accused of. I don't know if it's been proven in a court, so I'll just say alleged, but there's solid evidence behind it, basically. But if you want to know the full story again, I can link the actual BBC documentary and articles on them that they did, which will do a lot better job than this, but I'm not really going to do this justice, but I'll just kind of give the brief overview of this whole thing. So, T.B. Joshua was born in 1963, and he would eventually go on to found this place called the Synagogue Church of All Nations in Lagos, Nigeria. And this was a mega church, but it was kind of like a compound which consisted of a couple of other buildings in there, um, including a large hotel, which we'll get back to later. But he would do his usual televangelism stuff, giving speeches and faith healing and all that, but he kind of really hit his stride in the 90s when he would show off all these miracles that he was allegedly doing. Like, it'd be stuff like giving blind people their sight back, giving deaf people their hearing back, banishing demons from people, and agents of Lucifer and all this stuff. And really unhinged stuff, but a lot of evangelical groups, specifically in Africa and Europe, really latched onto this, and he ended up getting pretty popular, very wealthy, ended up becoming a pretty prominent figure in Nigeria specifically. But throughout this time, he kind of built this cult inside the compound behind the scenes, and he would try to target specifically white people because he wanted to show off that he had white people in his churches, so a lot of the promotional stuff would show white people in it, even though they appeared to be the minority in his church and in his congregations. But they wanted to show this off to get more into the European audiences there. And during this time, he would begin to accumulate a group of people, a group of disciples, as he called them, close together, and specifically a lot of women. And these women who would come out later with all of these allegations against him about how they were treated while they were with him and how they were close to him at the time. And this involved a lot of them, and this is over a dozen people, and a lot of them were claiming to have been underage at the time, who said that he had raped a lot of them and that they had been forced to have had abortions in very barbaric ways, which I won't get into the details of it. Again, you can watch the documentary and the articles, I'll link those below, but a lot of really messed up stuff that they did and that he did to them. And these people who would get into this cult, and they weren't allowed to leave because he had armed patrols going around this compound, and they weren't letting the people leave. He wasn't letting these people leave. Behind the scenes, they were basically just stuck there in this compound, kind of part of this whole cult that he'd put together. And at the time, while he was doing all of this stuff, he was getting into, I don't want to say he's getting into trouble because he didn't really face any consequences, but basically he tried to push this stuff like he'd sell anointed water that he would sell, and he said that during the Ebola outbreak, he said that it would cure the Ebola, and obviously it didn't do that. And a lot of his faith healing stuff, it wasn't real, clearly. Like, he'd bring people in and they'd fake having HIV or AIDS, or he'd give them fake documents that they would show on the TV. And you could tell a lot of the time that these aren't real. They're not really medical documents. But he'd go and cure all these diseases, or if they did actually have a sickness, he could give them some medication or something that would alleviate the symptoms during the church service. And he would have them write testimonies that he'd show off and show his divine power and all that. And probably one of the more notable events, well, that occurred was a hotel that was on his compound one day in 2014 collapsed and killed about 116 people. And this hotel, allegedly, according to him, TB Joshua, he said that it collapsed due to an airplane that flew over and somehow caused it to collapse. However, an investigation after the fact and by people who had worked in the hotel and around it prior to that said that he'd skimped out on building it and that it had a lot of very obvious structural instabilities, and in the hours leading up to it collapsing, they said that it was swaying back and forth and was just shoddily built, basically. And allegedly, again, this is all allegedly, because as far as I know, it hasn't really been solidified in a court of law, so just to cover myself here, but allegedly, he would go around and intimidate the families of victims and stuff like that in order to keep them quiet, because he didn't want eyes looking in on all of this. And eventually, TB Joshua, he ends up dying in 2021. And it's after this point that a lot of this stuff really gets into the BBC does their investigation, and a lot of this stuff ends up coming out after the fact. And his YouTube channel got deleted shortly before he died, but it got deleted because they would show screwed up stuff on there, like genital mutilation, or they'd show women giving birth, and hate speech specifically against the gay and LGBT and all that. He said he could cure the spirit of the gays and stuff like that. Hate speech, like actual real hate speech, where you would cure the gays or cure the lesbians, as he called it, and all this stuff, which would lead to the YouTube channel, which was called Emmanuel TV, named after his TV station by the same name, getting deleted. So, and then he died in 2021, and a lot of this stuff ended up coming out about how much of a just a real piece of shit he was as a person. And it came out, all of this stuff, after the fact. And again, you can look at the documentary, it'll do a lot more justice than this here. I'm just kind of giving a brief overview here, but he's just a real piece of shit, pretty much. So you can tell, obviously, why I didn't really want to make comedy out of the whole situation there, given everything that I'd learned and that had been revealed about the guy and all this stuff. But the main reason that I wanted to talk about it at all was because on the multi-part documentary that BBC has on YouTube, I was looking through the comments section, and in the comments section, they have, at minimum, half the comments there are people who are in support of this guy, of TB Joshua, who are really hardcore, still trying to push the idea that he's a man of God. TB Joshua is a healer, and he cured me of this, and he's a good man and a great man of God. And just really defending this guy with all their whole heart and all of this stuff. And a lot of these comments aren't that old. Like, there are some that are only like a month old. So this is still people coming out nowadays. And this guy's been dead for a couple of years now. So these people are still coming out. And I've found that in my watching of a lot of these televangelists, not just this guy, but other people, that generally when you have a crowd in a comment section that's filled with people who are pretty much only exclusively saying stuff like he's a prophet, or he's a man of God, or he's a healer or a divine disciple and stuff like that, when you get people who are saying that, it usually lends towards a cult type mindset that's behind the person. And in this case, it's one that's still very much around now, despite the fact that the guy, TB Joshua, is dead and has been since 2021. And all this stuff that has come out, and all these people that worked with them that have revealed their experiences that they've had there with them, and all the messed up shit that they've done. Allegedly, again, allegedly, because it hasn't been proven as far as I know in a court of law, but a guy who's a literal rapist and who had basically used slave labor. And these people are still defending this kind of thing, and I think that's kind of concerning. I mean, this place, the Synagogue Church of All Nations, it still exists. It didn't disappear when he died, but these people are still, this cult mindset around it is still there, defending this guy and defending the stuff in him and all of his beliefs, despite all of the abysmal shit that's come out about him. And I think it kind of lends towards a bigger mindset that a lot of people have regarding people, and not just in Nigeria, but just around the world in general, and not just about religion either. But you can have people who will do horrifying shit, just abysmal stuff. They can do the worst things humankind has ever done or seen, and you'll still get a bedrock group of supporters that will absolutely never leave the person despite this stuff. And that's kind of like televangelists here in the US, even though like Kenneth Copeland and Jim Bakker, scumbags though they may be, are not as bad as TB Joshua, at least as far as I know, as far as to my knowledge, aren't as bad as him. But, and again, not to get political here, but you get people like Elon or Trump, and you'll see this a lot with them, who you get these very hardcore supporters who, no matter what happens, will not leave this person and will stay by that person's side. And I think it kind of has some kind of, not to kind of get Freudian here, but it kind of lends into the human psychology a little bit. But it's really bizarre to look at and see how this guy, how TB Joshua, all this stuff comes out about him, and all this horrifying shit that he's done, and all this abysmal stuff, and how he treated people, and all of that, and how he still has this group of supporters, and how easy it is to connect that concept of this bedrock group of supporters to other groups here in the US, and extremist groups, if you want to call it that, in the US, who will get behind people like televangelists, like hate preachers, or like politicians and people like that. Or you still get neo-Nazis, obviously. You get KKK members, and no matter what you do, no matter how much information and logic and how much the news can reveal all this abysmal shit that people do, you're still going to have people that support them. And I think it's kind of just interesting to see that despite all of that, you can see this essentially still happening in real time in this comment section, which, again, I'm going to link the BBC documentaries and the articles below, which you should look at. I mean, it's pretty disgusting, a lot of this stuff, but it's interesting to look at that, and you see these videos, and you can see all the comment section, and again, it does a lot more justice than I do, but I just kind of thought that guy who I used to watch for comedy's sake, and now seeing all of this stuff, I thought I just kind of wanted to talk about it. So, yeah.